So I'm Sarah Lewis and I'm a chartered organisational psychologist. I started as a social worker and I moved from there into management, and that's where my interest in organisational development and workplace dynamics really took off. It was fascinating to discover that working with staff groups was in its own way as challenging as working with dysfunctional families. From there I went on to take my master's in organisational psychology, and then for the last 25 years I've been working to help organisations manage their organisational dynamics, helping people work better together, helping people communicate better, helping people create shared aspirations and shared motivations to move their organisation forward to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. So that's been a real passion, and of course I have passions outside of work as well, and one of my key hobbies over my life has been riding. I rode as a child, and then there was a long hiatus where I was involved with other things, and then I came back to it in my 40s and ended up buying my own horse, which was a real privilege and a pleasure. And that lasted for some years, and then time moved on and I no longer own my own horse, but I still ride regularly. And the skill, the excitement of the development of the skill, the pleasure of riding out in the countryside doesn't really diminish, and it's something that gives me great pleasure. So one of the things that's come out of positive psychology is an awareness of our innate strengths and how important they are to us in terms of confidence and resilience and skill and ability and performance. Knowing your own strengths and finding a way to work with them, finding an employment or a job or a passion in life that allows you to exercise your strengths brings a lot of benefit. We tend to feel at our best when we're using our strengths. We tend to feel more confident, have greater self-esteem and so on, because they are things we find easy to do, and obviously we can learn to use them more and more skillfully. Some of my strengths are love of learning. I've always loved learning. I have 5 degrees because I just love studying and learning and doing something new. That's why I find the life I lead as an external consultant working with different organisations all the time on different challenges to be so stimulating and engaging, because there's an element of learning all the time. I also have a passion for communication, and I do a lot of training and development because I really want to pass on some of the great things that I've learned, some of the experiences I've had, good and bad, that have allowed me to become a better practitioner, and I'm very keen to help other people with that, and I'm very keen to help people improve their communication with each other. There's something about words and language and working with those and sense making and meaning making that is very engaging for me, and I have a facility for the use of language. And then the final one is a strange one, actually. It's a strength of leadership. But for me, it's not expressed through leading teams of people, because I don't find myself a great manager. I don't have the strengths to be a great manager, but I can offer leadership. And I offer it in this very particular setting of being a temporary leader. I come in and lead processes. I come in and lead groups while we do an intervention, while we do some team development. And in that space, I'm very effective as a leader. Some people have called me a thought leader as well, because I'm interested to think about things and challenge perhaps some of the conventional ways of doing things, and so some people have found that quite inspiring, which is really nice to hear. So it's a leadership strength, but expressed in a particular context that works for me. And this is what I mean about strengths being very important to us, to understand our own strengths and how, given the totality of who we are and the mix of strengths that we have and life experiences and opportunities, how we can find the best way to bring those strengths to bring benefit to the world. So the company that I set up and run is called Appreciating Change. That's its trading name. Its formal name is Gemstone Consultancy Limited. We came up with the trading name, which is a bit of a play on words, because the company is all about change, helping organisations to do change, and it's also about appreciating how change can be beneficial. Appreciation also means to grow in value, appreciating assets that are growing in value. And so one of the things we try to do with the way that we help organisations with change is to make sure that it's a growth experience, that the change adds value both to people and organisations. So appreciating change is very much about bringing the best of positive psychology in general, to the workplace, to the ever-present challenge of growth and change in organisations, and applying it in such a way that the experience of change becomes a much more value-add, positive, strengthening experience for people. I became interested in organisational psychology when I was working as a manager of a large residential establishment for families at the end of the social work line. If they didn't manage to make changes, then they were likely to lose custody of their children. So it was very important that they were able to make the appropriate changes. But I started working with the staff team, and I realised that the staff team as well had to make changes. And that's where my real interest in organisational development came from. How could I help these staff be more effective workers? What kind of training did they need? What experiences together did we need to have to grow stronger as a unit so that we could help the families we were working with more effectively? So it was at that point in my life, when I was still actually a paid employee, that I started to become very interested in how these ideas and knowledge that I had about group psychology, social psychology, the psychology of people, how that all came together to help an organisation grow and develop its capability and its capacity so that it could be more effective, whatever its ambition was, whatever its goal was, which in this case, of course, was helping families change sufficiently that they could offer their children a safe and nurturing environment. Before the pandemic, most of my business was conducted face-to-face. I am quite a specialist in doing large group interventions. So using methodologies like appreciative inquiry, open space, World Cafe, to work with large groups to achieve change in the moment, change of how they relate to each other, how that change in their shared conception of the world, their shared mental model of the situation that they're in and the challenges that they face, and then helping them find ways forward from that they could put into place collectively. So there was a collective energy behind the drive for change, the aspirations for change, the motivation for change, and the actions for change. Well, of course, the pandemic came along and nobody was getting together with anybody. So a lot of my work over the last 2 years has been through the medium of video, like everybody else. This has been very interesting. It clearly has an effect on group dynamics, and yet at the same time, I think we've all learnt to make the most of this different way of being in the same space together. We've done the best we can with it, I have to say. I think in terms of the immediacy of the effect you get when people can move around, when it's easy to disperse into different groups and regroup in different formations, when people have a much more tangible sense of each other, when we can use our tactile senses as well as just our visual and auditory ones. I think it makes the whole experience much more impactful, and I'm personally greatly looking forward to being able to work with real groups in real time, in real space, on real issues. The Positive Organisational Development Card Pack is developed from the same research that I did for my book, Positive Psychology at Work. While researching that book, I identified 20 key concepts that underpinned positive organisational development. These are concepts taken from positive psychology that I could apply to the workplace to help organisations become more positive organisations. And these are things like psychological capital, engagement, and resilience, amongst others. And so for each of these cards, I identified a short phrase that kind of sums up the concept. So for resilience, for example, it's the bounce back factor. And a little bit about what it does. So resilience aids recovery following trauma or adversity. This is why it's important to organisations. And on the back of the card, there's 3 questions to stimulate discussion and 3 possible actions. So organisations can use these to identify how much of this do we have already, how prominent in our culture is this particular way of behaving or being? How strong are we in this area or not? They could do it on a scale of 1 to 10. They could rank order them. They could think about now and think about the future and what the difference might be. They could think about the culture they've got, the culture they want and what the difference is. They could think about their strategic objectives and therefore which of these they need to underpin the achievement of those strategic objectives. For instance, authentic leadership might be a key thing that they're going to need more of in the future. And then they can use the questions on the back to stimulate conversation and discussion, and use the ideas as a kind of launch pad for ideas of their own that will help them move towards becoming a more positive organisation with a real positive organisational culture. And the positive organisational development cards are available from our shop, thepositivepsychologyshop.com. The Appreciative Inquiry card pack I developed to help me both delivering appreciative inquiry sessions and particularly training people in appreciative inquiry. And the pack contains everything you need for both of those purposes. For example, there's a clear explanation of each of the 5 Ds in the 5D model of appreciative inquiry, with a little summary on the back of the D, so dream, discover, design, destiny, define. So there are these cards which have questions on the back which help you have a conversation in each of the 5 stages of the 5D model, and they're designed to be used either in a one-to-one kind of coaching situation or in a group situation. I also have a set of cards that define the core principles, 5 key principles. There are others, but these are the key principles, and explains briefly what they all are. So the key elements of appreciative inquiry, the 5D model and the principles are contained in the pack. And then the last set of cards has a pithy phrase on one side and an image on the other. The phrases express the spirit, the philosophy, the meaning, the approach of appreciative inquiry in kind of plain English. Different little expressions that help to get the essence of appreciative inquiry across in language that's more user-friendly than sometimes the explanations of the principles. And on the other side, there's a series of images that can be used to construct stories. So people can construct their own stories using the images. I find this particularly useful in the dream phase if we don't have other materials we can work with. At the very least, we have these picture cards that people can use to help to tell their story of their aspiration for the future. As a set, they're really useful as an aid memoir after a training session, and they're also useful for people who are relatively new to appreciative inquiry to help them plan how to run a session, to think about the questions they might want to ask, to think about how they might want to explain the principles or the 5D cycle to their audience as they go into the appreciative inquiry. They go very well with the book that I wrote with some colleagues a few years ago about using appreciative inquiry for change management. And both the book and the cards are available on our shop, our online shop, at thepositivepsychologyshop.com. So I developed these coaching cubes, which are rubber, squeezable, tangible, very tactile, different coloured cubes with a question on each side, as a coaching tool. They pull together 3 elements that are very important to me, which are appreciative inquiry, positive psychology, and systemic consulting, into a coaching model that I've called PRISM. The benefit of the cubes is that the questions are already there, so they can be used in a coaching situation. They're excellent for training, because one of the things about training coaches is that they find it quite hard to develop the kind of questions that we want to use in coaching. So here they have the questions already available. They're also really good for using in a coaching session because they allow you to do it differently. You can roll the dice, your coachee can roll the dice, you can roll all the dice and look at the 6 questions and come up and think which one's going to be most useful here, which one shall we work with. You can ask your coachee to choose a question. You can go through the sequence in the PRISM sequence, or you can use them any way your imagination allows you to. I know one person who used them as a team coaching exercise, gave everybody a cube and they asked the question that came up, and then she said, okay, so what's that referring to? And through that process they identified, as it were, the elephant in the room about what was happening within their team that needed to be spoken about. They are also, I suspect, very good for people who are very shy, who don't want to look the coach in the eye, find eye-to-eye contact a little challenging, because you can both be looking at the cube. And also it's the cube that's asking the question, which can put the coach in a different position vis-a-vis the question. You can both be looking at the question and side by side having the conversation, rather than the conversation being kind of across the space between you. So it's really up to people's imagination and creativity how you can use them, but they're there really just to enable you to have a different coaching experience. The coaching cubes come in this box here, which also has a leaflet inside it explaining everything I've just been talking about, and you can buy them directly from our online shop, thepositivepsychologyshop.com. So we've been encouraging people over the last few months with our social media to think about Sunday as a self-care day. We've called it Self-Care Sunday. For me, a real unwinding Sunday would involve some of these things probably. Spending time with the people I love. I mean, I'm fortunate to live with a husband who I love, and I also have some wonderful children, grown-up children, who sometimes come round, or maybe we'll go and meet them in Greenwich, and of course other friends. So getting together with the people I love. But I'm also basically an introvert, so I need time on my own. And a couple of the things that I really enjoy doing are reading. I'm a very avid reader, so being able to read in an uninterrupted way, or to watch a really good film, both of which can take me into a state of flow where everything else just disappears, I find very relaxing. And if at all possible, of course, I'll fit in something like a ride. You know, riding horses, going out in the woods on a horse with an instructor or a friend, I find to be a great way to unwind. And of course I also like eating and drinking, so the chance to have some really nice food, maybe have a glass of wine or a glass of beer with it, all of those things together add up to a self-care Sunday for me.